Hello, I am going to make a promise right now. In this short video, you will understand the full roadmap of Chinese history across 1,000 years, every major turning point, which each era built. And here's a bonus. By finishing this video, you will understand why did every other great ancient civilization eventually disappear, like Egypt, Rome, but China didn't. And more than that, why does China behave the way it does today? Why does it appear in Western media the way it does? The answer is in its history. First, let's do a quick test. How many dynasties does China have? Take a guess. Most people would say 5 or 10. The real answer, depending on how you count, is somewhere between 20 to 40. And that's before you factor in the periods when China fractured into 10 or 16 different governments running simultaneously. If that sounds impossible to learn, that's exactly why I'm making this video. You don't need to memorize all the dynasties. You learn the system. So think of China's history as an operating system. It crashes, it reboots, it upgrades. Every dynasty is just a version number. The core code, the language, the philosophy, the way of organizing society never fully disappears. It gets written on top of itself over and over across the past 5,000 years. So there are 5 versions we'll talk about today. So version number 1, Qin and Han dynasties. In this version, it's mainly about installing the system, and it's from 221 BCE to 220 CE. So it's about 440 years. Before version 1, the land we now call China today was hundreds of separate tribes and kingdoms. Some shared culture, some shared languages, but no unified country, no single identity. What changed everything was one man. His name is Qin Shi Huang. He's from 221 BCE. He is the first emperor of a united China and someone we respect him as a real creator of China. Qin only survived for 15 years, but in those 15 years, it did something that had never been done at that scale. It unified the writing system, standardized measurements and currency, abolished local lords, replaced them with a central government. Sound like how we live today, right? In modern terms, it installed the operating system, same language across the network, same transaction standards, one central server, followed by Han Dynasty. It took over and ran for another 400 years. If Qin Dynasty built the body, then Han gave it a soul. Confucianism became the official philosophy, the same ethical framework about family, loyalty, and hierarchy, spreading across every civilization. The Silk Road opened trade routes to Rome, and China started calling itself Han, which it still does today. Hanzi, Han characters. It still ran the code 2,000 years later. Qin built the body. Han gave it a soul. But we know every operating system eventually crashes. Han crashed in 220 CE, and what followed was nearly 400 years of fragmentation. The version most people outside of China have never heard of, and the one that explains the most. So, version 2, the crash that built the culture. This period of time spans across 220 to 589 CE. So that's about 370 years. It has 3 kingdoms, Western Jin, 16 different kingdoms running simultaneously in the north, repeatedly occupied by nomadic groups from the steppes. The south preserved Han Dynasty culture, but couldn't reunify. Wars didn't stop for the whole 400 years. So why does this period matter? Because crashes are when the most interesting things happen. You know, when one system controls everything, nothing else can barely grow. The moment central control collapsed, everything kept out came flooding in. Buddhism arrived from India and became permanently woven into Chinese culture. Calligraphy became a serious art form. Poetry developed the rules that would define Chinese literature for 1,000 years. And The nomadic groups who invaded the north didn't erase Han culture. They absorbed it. They learned the language, adopted the administration, and intermarried. And Han culture in return absorbed elements from them. The system wasn't destroyed. It was being upgraded in the background, while it looked like it was crushing in the surface. So this is the first answer to the big question. Why did China survive when others didn't? Because even in collapse, the cultural core was too embedded to replace. The conquerors themselves became Chinese. The crash wasn't a dead end, it was the update. After nearly 400 years of fragmentation, the Sui dynasty briefly reunified China, then collapsed again after a short 37 years. So think of Sui dynasty as a reboot sequence. It got the system back online. What came next was the golden release. So version 3, the fabulous and flourishing Tang and Song dynasties. We call it the golden release. It's from 618 to 1279 CE. So it's about 660 years. Tang dynasty spans across 7th to 10th century. The capital city Chang'an has over 1 million population, and a remarkable number of them were foreigners, Persian merchants, Japanese students, Arab travelers, Central Asian musicians. It was the most cosmopolitan city on the planet. There is no exaggeration that we call it New York back at that time. And Tang poetry, Li Bai, Du Fu, Wang Wei, 3 of the greatest poets in Chinese history, all within the same 100 years. The density of genius in that 1 century is almost unreasonable if you look through the whole history. Then Song dynasty. Don't underestimate it because it wasn't really good at wars. That's the wrong matrix. Song was the most advanced commercial civilization on earth at the time. Paper money, Song dynasty invented it. Movable type printing, also Song. The compass applied to ocean navigation, definitely by Song. Porcelains so refined that the world tried to copy, also by Song. And one strange thing to you, the civil service exam, selecting government officials through standardized open testing rather than by birth or social connection, started in Sui dynasty, systemized in Tang dynasty, reached its full maturity in Song. Open, in theory, to anyone who could study hard enough. Europe wouldn't have anything comparable for another 1,000 years. Tang dynasty was open and confident. Song was brilliant and precise. So if you are into Chinese art, literature, religion, poetry, philosophy, anything beautiful you can think about, or what you find so charming in the museums, you definitely need to explore Sui, Tang, Song, these 3 dynasties. By the time Song ended, something important has been proven. The Chinese operating system could survive not just internally, but also the external conquest. And version 4 tested that completely. So version 4, big expansion and empire finalized. It spans across 1271 to 1912 CE. It's about another 640 years. Something Western education can often miss. China wasn't always ruled by Han Chinese. In the 13th century, Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, established Yuan dynasty. China was officially plugged into a continent-spanning network from the Pacific to Eastern Europe. Marco Polo came during this period of time. The Mongols, one of the most powerful military forces in the human history, conquered China. And then they adopted Chinese culture, Chinese administration, Chinese language for governance. So again, interestingly, the system absorbed the conquerors. Then Ming dynasty followed. It restored Han, built the Great Wall in its most recognizable form. Ming also sent Zhenghe on 7-ocean voyages, reaching Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, the east coast of Africa, 6 decades before Columbus crossed the Atlantic. Then Qing dynasty, built by the Jurchen people from the northeast, again not Han Chinese. They inherited the operating system, kept it running, expanded China's territory to almost its modern shape. Same pattern repeating, different people, but the same underlying code. The empire wasn't just one people. It was one system kept absorbing whoever arrived. And then, lastly, version 5. It was the darkest century and the hardest time, and it was the reboot. It's from 1840 to 1949. So that's about 109 years, a whole century. I wanted to spend a little bit more time here than anywhere else, because this is the part most Western audience were never taught properly. Yet this period of time has massively but negatively influenced how Western world perceive China. Without knowing it, you genuinely cannot understand why Chinese behave the way it does today. This period have a name that every Chinese knows. It's called 百年屈辱, the century of humiliation, because it has brought way too much trauma, tragedy to this nation and to most of Chinese families. In 1840, the first Opium War started. Britain wanted to sell opium in China. China said no, but Britain had the superior military force and technology, so Britain won. China was forced to open ports, hand over Hong Kong, pay reparations. The first of what Chinese historians called unequal treaties, signed not because China agreed to, but because it has no choice. France, Russia, Japan, Germany followed, each carving out zones of control inside China's territory. In 1894, the first Sino-Japanese War broke out. China lost. Taiwan was ceded to Japan. The empire that sent fleets to Africa 4 centuries ago couldn't defeat its smaller neighbor. The psychological shock was so enormous. And in 19th century, 8 nations invaded into Beijing, the capital city. This is a moment most Westerners didn't even know, and the one that explains the most. A grassroots movement called the Boxers, fed up with foreign interferences, attacked foreign nationals. The Qing dynasty court declared war on all foreign nations. So, 8 nations responded. About 20,000 troops occupied the capital city Beijing. Weeks of looting followed. The Forbidden City, the Summer Palace, homes, temples were stripped. Then came the Boxer Protocol. China was fined 450 million taels of silver, 1 tael for every Chinese person, calculated deliberately, so the humiliation was personal and total. With interest, the final amount reached nearly 1 billion taels. 1 tael per person. It was not an economic calculation. It was a message of humiliation. Foreign troops were permanently stationed in Beijing. The system that had survived 5,000 years was, for the first time, genuinely on its knees. Imagine a grown-up man, confident enough, was put onto the ground by a stranger. A gun on his head, he was being told, "You can only follow what I tell you to." In 1912, Qing dynasty eventually collapsed. Republic of China established. In theory, it should be a new beginning, right? But in practice, the country fragmented into warlord territories immediately. During 1921 to 1937, 2 forces in China merged. The nationalist KMT, under the management of Jiang Jieshi, and the Chinese Communist Party, which we call CCP. They collaborated briefly, then Jiang purged communists in 1927. So there was a civil war. The communists were nearly destroyed. Moved to 1937, Japan launched full-scale invasion, a darkest time in Chinese history. The leader of KMT, Jiang Jieshi, he had a famous saying, "The Japanese are a disease on the skin, but the CCP is a disease on the heart." But in the Xi'an accident, which is a political movement, his own generals kidnapped him and forced a conversation. KMT and CCP formed a united front against Japan. While they both are internally preparing for the civil war, they know that will definitely follow. 8 years of total war, cities bombed, catastrophic casualties. Then in December 1937, Nanjing, the capital city back then, fell. What followed became known as the Nanjing City Massacre. Estimates of Chinese being slaughtered in that city, over 300,000. Tens of thousands of women were raped, killing and head collecting competition within the Japanese troops for a whole 6 weeks, reported by international press real time. This is not distant history in China. It lives in family memory. It is why the relationship between China and Japan remains complicated in today, in ways that outsiders don't always understand. It is not Chinese overreacting to bilateral economies or politics. It is a century-old hatred. It is because our grandparents living today, when they recall this memory, they will burst into tears. Later in 1945, Japan surrendered. As expected, civil war resumed immediately. Despite billions of American military aid, the nationalists fell. They retreated to Taiwan. The communists controlled mainland China. After 109 years of foreign occupation, unequal treaties, internal wars, starvation, and massacre, those words carried a huge weight that is very hard for someone outside this history to fully feel. When you consume news about China, the sensitivity around foreign criticism, the emphasis on sovereignty, the suspicion of Western intentions, the priority placed to stability and strength, even military, none of that comes from nowhere. It came from this century. As I said, this darkest century in Chinese history. A country that had 8 nations marched into its capital city, watched its cities burnt down and people slaughtered. A full century of humiliation and being told it was too weak to deserve a full dignity. But remember, it was a civilization that once was so brilliant and proud. That experience doesn't disappear in just one generation. It shapes what a civilization fears, what it protects, what it will and won't accept. This isn't a defense of every policy that followed. It's context. And without it, the China you read about in the news will never quite make sense. The reboot was the hardest. The code underneath was never changed. So now, the question from the beginning, why did China survive while others collapsed? You've just watched 5 versions of the answer. Every time Chinese crashes, the core code survived. Even when conquerors come, none of them replaced the system itself. They ran it instead because it was too functional, too deeply rooted, and too culturally impossible to erase. So Rome crashed because nobody rebooted it. Egypt crashed. The culture that replaced it was fundamentally different. China crashed multiple times, but each of the reboot carried the old code forward into something more complex when its roots go deep enough to survive almost everything. So don't just read a textbook. Pick the version that interests you the most and find one way in. Empire building and legendary figures, Qing and Han dynasty. Believe me, I think Qin Shi Huang is the most powerful and fascinating men in Chinese history. Poetry, beauty, calligraphy, literature, Han Dynasty, of course. Innovation, commerce, elegant design, architecture, Song Dynasty, modern China and why it is the way it is. Start with version 5, but don't just stop there. Chinese history were never a list of dynasty names. It is a program running for 5,000 years. Crushing, rebooting, upgrading. I think you've learned a lot today. I'll see you in the next video.